This video contains spoilers for both Final Fantasy VII and VIII. Final Fantasy VIII is rough. As a game, it was lost for 2 decades. As a piece of art, it was missing, cut completely out of Final Fantasy canon. Final Fantasy VIII came out in 1999, 2 years post Final Fantasy VII. As a result, the game had more than a mountain of potential to stand up against. In most ways, to critics and the general audience, Final Fantasy VIII didn't. However, in one aspect, the game did. Final Fantasy VIII didn't just match FF7 in this regard, in fact, it excelled at it. Of course, I'm talking about romance, about love, and about relationships. Final Fantasy VIII may be the black sheep of PS1 era Final Fantasy, of PS1 era Square and Enix even, a game lost to both time post-release and history prior to release. This very much was a reputation incredibly undeserved, mind you. The game does excel in areas Final Fantasy had not yet shined. The title preceding it, FF7, is a game about everything. It means different things to different people. FF7 can best be described as a game of unlimited meanings about revenge, ecological collapse, friendship, trauma, struggle, and death, among a near unlimited amount of other meanings. Final Fantasy VIII, by contrast, is a game solely about love. Love between friends, love between Cid and Ida, a lack of love between society and sorceress, and at its very core, about the affection between Squall Leonhardt and Rinoa Hartilli. Final Fantasy VIII is flawed in multiple aspects. The game mechanics were confusing and the story was rushed, and the title was overly maligned as a result. But no matter what has been said or could be said, Final Fantasy VIII is a game about relationships. At this, Final Fantasy VIII excels. At this, Final Fantasy VIII masterfully weaved a modern tale of love and loss. At this, Final Fantasy was at its best. This story has been thoroughly tread before, but in 1997, Squaresoft released its highest selling game in their entire history. Before and after the Square Enix merger, there has not been a game as successful from the studio as Final Fantasy VII. The studio has not released a game as unifying of its audience either. There hasn't been a video game praised by the world to the degree Final Fantasy VII was from the studio. There hasn't been a game as impactful as FF7 from the studio at all. This one title changed the course of gaming history. This singular game pushed Sony's PlayStation to the top of the gaming world. The game made Squaresoft a name to know. To many, the game has never been replicated, nor will it ever be to others. The story of FF7 is widely known. The world of Gaia and the respective inhabitants have been referenced throughout an unknowable amount of media ever since the initial release. Cloud Strife, Sephiroth, Aerith Gainsborough, Tifa Lockhart, and Barrett Wallace are recognizable names to any fan of video games. Each of their shadows are recognizable by default. Final Fantasy VII changed gaming history, so whatever followed it had to as well. This is where Final Fantasy VIII failed. As a game, it isn't bad. In fact, it's really great. But Final Fantasy VIII was not FF7, and thus the game would always have an uphill climb to any reception similar to what it preceded. Final Fantasy VIII is very much the antithesis of Final Fantasy VII, while also very much being the conclusion of the design scheme behind FF7. Squall Leonhardt was all of Cloud's edge taken up 10 levels, just as Rinoa Hartilli was all of Aerith's charm taken to a max. The difference between FF7 and VIII was that Cloud started as a loner, but underneath his outside appearance and personality was never such. Squall was forced into being a loner by the world, and from the traumas in his past. It took the entire game for Squall to become honest, to open up, and even then, it was almost too late for him. Where Final Fantasy VIII suffers in its characterization, only 2 characters are truly interesting. Luckily though, those are the 2 whom you'll fall in love with, during the same length of time it took for the 2 of them to fall in love with each other. When I describe Final Fantasy VIII as a game primarily about love, I mean it. The game's story was built on love, the love a matron mother had for adopted children, the love between 2 people from vastly different worlds, the love friends had for each other. Final Fantasy VIII was a love story grafted onto the typical high fantasy of the FF series. FF8 was not solely a love story between Squall and Rinoa. It's a story about Squall opening up to others and accepting his friends. The cast in Final Fantasy VIII are all related in a sense. All of them, excluding Rinoa, had been together in childhood, at the same home with the same matron. Though they forgot for a time, the characters had been friends for ages. In their adulthood or late teenage years, they found themselves reunited as seeds, effectively assassins. Their purpose in life was to take out sorceresses. Coincidentally, their first target was the woman who at one point looked after them, though none of them realized at the time. The woman who loved them for their earliest years and during their lost memories, they'd have to go into battle against her. That is, of course, the meaning of being a seed. They are trained to go after sorceresses, no matter who the sorceress was. This mission was unsuccessful. The seeds royally messed up the flow of the operation. Ida was simply too powerful for the rookie recruits to go against. Squall was partly to blame for the mission's failure. He was pierced with Ida's ice strike, taking him out of the fold before he could even step up. The next half of the game that followed the failed assassination follows the group as they continue to chase after Ida, eventually defeating her and taking Ultimacia out of her body. The rest of FF8 follows Squall and his comrades as they chase after Ultimacia. During the storyline, the team grows together. Though the character growth of the side characters is nearly non-existent, they act as facilitating entities to Squall as he grows. There was a relationship between the characters. They were friends, in essence a found family. They only ever cared about what would make Squall have an easier time. Over the course of the entire game, the group all tried their hardest to get Squall to speak honestly to them, which after a while he did. The biggest architect of Squall's open heart was Rinoa, the girl of his dreams, as he was the guy of hers. Quite literally in the case of Rinoa's dream. Rinoa as a character was nothing new for Final Fantasy. As I said earlier, she takes the charm of Aerith to the max. I honestly believe that. Unlike Aerith, she never died, even if she got quite close to death more than once. What makes Rinoa such an interesting character was how fleshed out she became. She has 4 discs for character growth, which I believe Squaresoft took advantage of. She wasn't a victim of an early death for plot purposes. She instead receives an amazing amount of quality storytelling from the team behind FF8. Rinoa exhibits very real growth, starting the game off as a rebel, fighting for the independence of her home Timber. While she rebelled against the Galbadian forces, her father had been a top army officer of the very military force she fought against. In turn, Rinoa began her fight as a pacifist, her character immediately contrasting Squall and all the Seeds, who valued violence as a means to an end. As time goes on, Rinoa accepts Squall's ideals, though never changing from her own. As evident by when she becomes a sorceress herself, she willingly left her friends and Squall for their safety. She would have stayed there had Squall not understood his feelings for her and forced himself to break her out. The only reason Rinoa was saved from captivity was because of Squall's love for her, the same love that saved her again and again before and after. The same love that saved Squall when he needed it the most. Squall, when contrasted with Rinoa, are nothing alike. Their differences are what brought them together. The romance that grew between them was so beautiful to read through, and was the highlight of Final Fantasy VIII. Squall started as a broken man, someone who shut himself off from the world completely. As a child, he lost his role model in the disappearance of his stepsister. The result of this one incident led Squall to closing himself for what he believed would be the rest of his life. What broke Squall out of this husk of non-emotions and sorrow was his love for Rinoa. Final Fantasy VIII starts off because of love, the love between Ida and Cid, and it ended because of love. Squall would have died without Rinoa. It was only because of the love they had for each other that saved him. The notion of love informed every character's action, beginning with Squall's lack of love, to Quistis' misinterpretation of love, and finally to the love between Rinoa and Squall. Squall and Rinoa depicted a beautiful version of love, a version of romance Square had never told before. In my brief history playing Final Fantasy, FF8 is one of the best representations of romance. Square has been trying to merge romance and fantasy for a long time. I can't lie, Final Fantasy VIII does the merging justice. The entire plot of Final Fantasy VIII revolves around the burgeoning romance between Squall and Rinoa, as I've discussed briefly. Another example is when Rinoa's love for Squall saves him from Galbadia's D-District prison, or when his love for her later saves her from suffocation in space. Squall went from a character without a single care for others to being willing to sacrifice himself for someone he loved. I don't believe Squall would have sacrificed himself for his mentor Quistis or his close friend Zell. He might have, but he certainly and factually moved mountains to be together again with Rinoa. Rinoa, in her own development, went from contracting Cid to joining them in fighting because of her romance for Squall. Had she not loved Squall or had any feelings early on, she would have returned to Timber and continued her operations there. The depictions of romance in FF8 are some of the most beautiful in the series. The passion between the characters is played completely sincerely. Even in Final Fantasy XVI, the most recent release of mainline Final Fantasy, the romance between Clive and Jill was demonstrated genuinely. As games have become more and more insincere, more pessimistic, and more uninteresting, I'm glad that my favorite developer has continued to avoid what has harmed the genres they define. One final aspect to discuss is the ending of FF8. Unlike Final Fantasy VII, wherein the world is rebirthed centuries later with a more peaceful world returned to nature, in Final Fantasy VIII you're left with a little bit of a cliffhanger. If you don't watch the entire credits sequence, you'd think Squall died. He'd been unable to go back to one moment, he doubted his intentions, memories, and relationships. If you close the game there, Squall passed away, sacrificing himself for humanity and Rinoa. If you watch the rest of the game's credits, you'd see Rinoa find him in the time-compressed world right before he passes, just as he found her in space before she passed. Squall's bonds weren't as strong as possible. He doubted himself and lost his abilities. He didn't believe in the love for him was a thing. He panicked and got lost. What saved Squall in the end was Rinoa's love for him. She knew where to find him. He might not have known, but she did. The end credits show everyone happy together again, selfie-recording the evening with a camera, until getting to where Rinoa was when the battery dies. Soon the credits wrap and there's one final cutscene. Rinoa points to the stars, next to her is Squall. He smiles at her, they hold hands, hug, and then kiss. The end. And with that, a beautiful moment passes and the game is over. Final Fantasy VIII may not be the best in the series. The game is definitely not even the best one of the PS1 era. Nor is it the best Final Fantasy about romance. Sure, it has flaws, but I loved it. Is Final Fantasy VIII my personal favorite? No, but it's still a great game. Squaresoft had a certain way with making these games in the past that can't be denied. I sincerely believe this one is worth remembering, partially because of how it changed Final Fantasy as a series, but also as a piece of art. The story is almost entirely original. It's one of Final Fantasy's best. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this. I beat Final Fantasy VIII in a week in December. I wrote this over the course of a week or so, as well. My apologies if the video isn't anything special. I've been pretty slammed with things to do in the last month on this channel, and wound up not doing too many. If you want to go out of your way to make my day, you can like, comment, subscribe, or check out my Life is Strange video. I put a lot of work into it, and it's very personal to me. Or check out whatever else is on screen now to see something more analytical. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope you have a good day.